The changing profile of the Boston City Council has led to some new initiatives and a new push to increase diversity, whether in the city's workforce or in access to exam schools. To bring us up to date is a graduate from one of those schools and the current council president. We'd like to welcome Andrea Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
After that comparison, if you look at the City Council, these gains by women of color, why can't the rest of the city be more like that?
I don't know. So I am excited to be focusing in this term on the public safety agencies and increasing not only the number of women, but people of color. And I put out a report that has 10 recommendations that says, one, let's make sure that we put out the appropriate data. So if you look at the low tier ranks, whether it's fire, police, or EMS, it's predominantly white. If you look at the top tier ranks, it gets even worse. And if you look at the demographics, of course, of the city of Boston, we're becoming more multicultural, more multilingual, more women, more people of color. And so the question is, why are there so many gaps? So I think we have to be transparent with that data. We also have we have these great diversity officers. Let's resource them. Let's give them money. Let's give them a budget. Let's give them staff. Let's also talk about civil service, which I think is the elephant in the room. This process, of course, came about to get rid of political patronage, but right now we're seeing a system that is not necessarily fair for everyone. And so the question is, how do we revamp that system? And so I call for a study looking at the pros and cons to see what we can do better.
I read between the lines here an effort to at least get more wiggle room around veterans' preference, but I also feel that's sort of a third rail, if not legally, then at least politically.
I mean, it might be politically. I don't think in those terms. I think, I got into this work to have an impact and to make a difference for not just folks in my district, but for those folks that feel as though they've been marginalized or haven't been served by a system. And so the question is, for me, if this system is leaving out certain folks, whether it's women or people of color, or even some veterans that come back and maybe getting bypassed through the BPD hiring process, the question is, if this system isn't working for some, it cannot be working for all of us. So how do we revamp a system that isn't working and try something different? My goal is to have every single person around this table who cares about this issue, so whether it's veterans groups, disabled groups, or those who support those with disabilities, folks from communities of color, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, NAACP, the ACLU have been showing up with respect to these issues for a really long time. And so my work builds upon theirs. And so I say, let's invite everyone to the table, because we can't keep talking about this. If we hope to change the numbers, we have to take action for our public safety agencies to be more reflective of the city of Boston's demographics.
I'll assume that qualified people are out there somewhere of all racial backgrounds, but why is it important to have more of them represented than there is currently?
I mean, this is something that we hear from community folks all the time. They want to force in their public safety agencies to look like the demographics of their community. There are numerous reports out there, including one out of the Justice Department that was recent, that says it builds trust between community and law enforcement and vice versa. With all that's happening across the country, don't get me wrong, Boston is doing really well. And so the question is, how can we continue to do better? And we do better by having a workforce that represents the people we serve, not just in our public safety agencies, across every single department in the city of Boston. We should all care about this. And these are good, high-paying jobs that everyone should have fair access to.
I guess I'll hazard a generalization that police and EMTs spend more time out in the neighborhoods and the communities, whereas firefighters spend more of their time, even though they work very hard and very dangerously, they spend more of their time in firehouses. There's a report about what's going on there, especially how that affects women. What did you think about that?
I mean, the report that came out that looked at the fire department with respect to allegations of whether it's sexual harassment or just a culture that is not welcoming or inclusive of all. I think the report had limitations in that we need to look at this across every department. If we're talking about a city workforce that has predominantly been white and male, these concerns are far and wide. They could be not just at the fire department, the sewer commission, you name it. And so we have to be intentional, not only by taking our employees through training and robust training to address these issues, but we have to make sure that we're training the leaders of these departments to also be equipped to handle this. As council president, I now not only oversee my council staff, but the council as an institution and the employees that serve this great institution. It's a lot of work. And so for me to make sure that we have a robust sexual harassment policy and training around that, you have to be intentional. I'm lucky that I work with colleagues every single day that are putting forth policies to make sure that everyone feels included, valued, and that there's a culture of respect and understanding and compassion with one another. And of course, we all benefit in the work because of that.
This has been a news, and we're talking with Boston City Council President Andrea Campbell. Councilor, the Boston Globe recently had this series about what became of Boston Public School valedictorians. I thought they were going on to great things. Some of them did do that, and some of them really struggled. What did you take away from that?
I care deeply about education for several reasons. I mean, personally, I know I wouldn't be sitting here with you, I wouldn't be council president, I wouldn't be a Princeton alum graduate, a law school graduate, if it weren't for Boston Latin School and the 4 other BPS schools that I went to that were all excellent. So the question is whether or not folks in our community have access to a quality school. Not everyone does. And then those folks who are leaving our system, are they prepared to go out into the workforce? Do they have adequate skills to not only get a good job, a good career, and not low paying, not low wage, one that they actually want to accomplish something great and fulfill their God-given purpose. We have a lot of work to do to redesign a BPS system that isn't working for everyone, whether it's valedictorians or exam schools and lack of diversity at our exam schools, or our open enrollment high schools that are not serving our students well, and that may need more resources because we're concentrating students with the most need in some of these open enrollment high schools. There's a long list of educational issues that we have to focus on. One thing that I want to make sure that we don't do is blame the principals, the teachers, the families, the students. This is a system problem. This is a BPS district problem, a city hall problem. We have to work together to make sure that we're redesigning assignment policies. We're really looking deeply at enrollment and many other issues, and not making it our family's fault, but really looking at ourselves and saying, what can we do better to ensure that every family has access to a quality education?
One factor in the struggles for a lot of these grads is the gap between the academic requirements, especially in the general admission high schools and even the exam schools and colleges. Do you have to bring them up to a higher level, or do you have to help the students catch up in a different way?
I was at a breakfast meeting not too long ago, and there was the conversation was about whether or not we're preparing our students who graduate from high school for the new jobs that are coming online, requiring tremendous skill sets, and not just the skill sets, but even the basics, right? Being able to read and write. We have a lot of our high school students that are graduating, underperforming, and then going to, say, a community college, paying for remedial classes, not getting credit for those classes. They're not prepared. And this isn't their fault. And it's not necessarily the teacher's fault, right? We are looking at a curriculum that might be outdated. We have to have a conversation about that. We may be looking at skill sets that aren't actually available in some of our schools. So how do we make sure that we're pulling in everyone to this conversation and doing the tough work of making sure we're producing a student population that has not only great skill sets, can do the basics, and can go after really good really good jobs and meet the expectations of some incredible employers out there. We have work to do.
What about exam schools? Because this is one case, there are exams, there's a lot of prep that some kids get, some even when they're as young as 4 years old. I mean, how do you make that an equal playing field?
One of the things the articles pointed out is the lack of information that a lot of families have, how to navigate the system and how to do that well. There are some families that are more equipped, and so this goes to the equity piece, right, and whether or not people have access. So we talk about this city is thriving with respect to so much, and sometimes people want to say we're thriving even with respect to our educational system and how great Boston is doing. But there's a population of folks, largely that come from my district of Dorchester and Mattapan or Roxbury, who feel left out, who want access to this shared prosperity and to these opportunities. And that means good information with respect to our schools, making sure that they are at the table when talking about revamping policies in terms of making sure they have fair access. There's a lot that we have to do. But we can't just look at it with respect to our schools. This is access in terms of economic development, transportation, careers, jobs. The list is long where folks just feel like they're left out or they're not a part of this prosperity that we may see in other neighborhoods. And so we have to address this work through an equity lens and making sure everyone has a fair shot and that they're not going to fall behind by the zip code or neighborhood in which they live, by their race or some other difference in their demographic.
Thinking about school opportunities in your district primarily, any thoughts on how the Build BPS plan affects that?
So Build BPS, I think, yes, some of our schools need new buildings, and we need to think about whether or not we have a building that can house thousands but only has hundreds of students. You know, is that efficient? Is that effective? But Build BPS alone is not going to solve the problems affecting our school district. There are some families that would maybe refer to some of our open enrollment high schools as either dropout factories or where folks just aren't learning. That's a problem. It's not just a resource issue with respect to BPS. I think BPS has enough money. The question is, what is happening with the resources? Are we directing it at the school level? Are we putting it in the hands of the school leaders, the teachers, the staff, the students? How do we decentralize a little bit to empower those schools to be able to have a greater impact in their building? So Build BPS is one piece of the puzzle, but we have to talk about academics, we have to talk about curriculum, we have to talk about preparedness, we have to talk about early ed and our English language learners and whether or not they have the adequate resources. And I'll go back to early ed, how critical pre-K is. We don't need another report, and yet the folks within our system don't have access. They're a long waiting list. So we have a lot more work to do, and it has to be comprehensive, and it can't just involve one piece of the puzzle.
I can't let you go without asking something about housing, and even your district is feeling some of the pressure of gentrification. Between the ideas from the mayor and some of your colleagues in the council, anything that you like about ways to mitigate that problem?
We have to be talking about anything and everything. Yes, Boston is leading with respect to having IDP linkage, the CPA, which I was proud to co-lead with Councilor Flaherty. Other municipalities across the country don't have that. But if we have to expand those pots of money or change the formula in order to create more resources, we need to do that. We have an affordable housing crisis, and I always like to pull that apart. There are folks who are working 2 or 3 jobs, can't afford to live in the city, veterans, seniors. This is what when we say affordable housing, these are the folks we're talking about. We have a proposal before the council right now with Councilor Janey and Councilor Edwards looking at this fee for flipping. Everything needs to be talked about, and I'm proud to lead a council that is not afraid to talk about innovative ideas and to work in partnership with the mayor, who also is putting forth some proposal. My goal is to make sure that the council is working in partnership with the administration and moving the needle in terms of responses we can have to this crisis, because it's just not going to go away on its own. And like many folks have said, the market alone won't solve it. Yes, we need to build more units, but we also need to be thinking outside the box and making sure everyone is a part of those solutions. Developers included, who have been very creative, sometimes in various districts, to be able to create more affordable housing. They too need to be at the table.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Boston City Council President Andrea Campbell. Up ahead, school sports with Pat Flaherty.